Mama, I got bad news, bad news. I've been rolling with some bad dudes, bad dudes. I've been trying to get a bag too,
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Ashes to Awesome podcast, Rising in Recovery. Our podcast provides light, hope, and understanding about addiction and mental health to those living within that life and the people who love them. Today's episode is brought to you by Revolution Recovery, helping men recover and become their best selves through support and treatment. They've been there and they understand. Hello, everybody, watchers, listeners, supporters, the whole wackia. Welcome to another episode of the Ashes to Awesome podcast. I'm your host, Chuck LaFlange, and with me in virtual studio today is Don Fertman. Now, Don is, he's a man in recovery, long-term recovery, of course. You might even recognize him if you're a fan of Undercover Boss, and we'll talk about that. Undercover Boss, and he is on the board of the Phoenix Foundation or organization. What do we call him that? The Phoenix Rise, Recover, and Live. So Don and I came into each other's lives when I saw him on my colleague's show, the Blacklist podcast. And 2 minutes in, Don was talking about stigma. And as any of you that have been listening for any amount of time know, that's a hot button topic for me. And he had my attention from there. So welcome to the show, Don. Thank you very much for coming on. Yeah.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me be here.
So how are things in Connecticut this afternoon for you?
Beautiful. I'm looking out the weather window here, and the trees are turning nicely. The fall weather is beautiful, and
I love fall. I love fall. Yeah,
it just reminds me how good it is to be alive and in recovery and sober and clean and just being able to enjoy the moment. And I get now to have a moment with you and a moment with your listeners. And how great is that?
Right? Yeah, it's all about those connections. And we will, of course, talk more about that. We got our first dump of snow yesterday. So
what?
I'm like, I'm tromping through this white stuff. And, I'm like, I'm like, wait a minute. Pretty soon the white stuff is going to be sand. So how about we just, not complain about anything right now, right? So we can talk more about that as we go on. Yeah, right. I know I wear my toque for the last couple of days. I actually just took it off. We're wearing it for recordings, everything, because I'm like, I might not be wearing a toque ever again. Who knows, right? If all goes well, anyway. If all goes well. If I come back and visit home, it'll be in the nice days, not in the middle of winter. So, yeah. Anyway, Don, we talked yesterday about this. So I don't want to do the whole story and reliving all those memories and all of those things. But for some context, how do we get to a point where recovery is your thing, where you're heading up the Phoenix, where you're doing all the things that you're doing? There's a story behind that. So
I guess we all have a story, right? And that's one of the things that we have in common. And I think that's one of the things that creates connection is our stories, because even though underneath everything, when we're in addiction, when we're in alcoholism, when we're experiencing substance use disorder, we're all united by that, and that's kind of the same. Like underneath it all, we're the same, but each of us has a unique story. How we got there? How did we get to this particular place? And mine isn't all that unique in that I had two crazy alcoholic parents, and I grew up with, the memory. My first memory was, it's almost like it's not unlike, coming out of a blackout. It's like I came out of a blackout of non-existence to existence. And at the age of, I must have been around 3 years old. And the first thing I remember is I'm being held by this woman who it turns out was my babysitter. And she was saying to me, "You poor kid. You poor kid." And what was the paw? She was from New York. So she had an accent, right? What she was saying was, "You poor kid," because my parents were in the next room, and I remember looking into the other room, and my parents are literally in a fist fight. I'm 3 years old. They're getting dressed to go out. She's there to take care of me, the babysitter, and my parents are yelling and screaming, And then my mother hauls off and wallops my dad. And my dad had, even at a fairly young age, he had dentures, and his
Okay.
dentures go flying out. And this is my first memory of life, is somebody telling me, "You're a poor, poor kid,"
Wow.
which told me that there was something the matter, and that there was something the matter with me because I'm the poor, poor kid. And it started me on my adventure of self pity and fear and insecurity, which didn't resolve itself. Well, actually, I guess it really hasn't resolved itself because I still have some of that stuff. But it kind of set me on a particular road. So, there I am filled with fear and lack of self esteem and insecurity and, just feeling. I ended up with this feeling of self pity that kind of haunted me. To this day, I can still, sit around and get on the pity pot, as they call it.
Yes.
But thanks to what I've discovered in recovery, that I can get off of the pity pot. I have the tools to do that today. And by doing things like listening to positive reinforcement, like I would get from the Ashes to Awesome podcast or the Blacklist podcast or the Rise, Recover, Live podcast or the Dopey podcast. There are a bunch of podcasts out there.
You know what? We're going to talk about Dopey. So you were
Yeah,
at DopeyCon, but we'll get to that. He's a part of my
yeah,
story in a big way, actually. Dopey is. So
yeah.
we'll talk
Okay,
about that.
because I was at DopeyCon
Yeah, I saw that.
last
Yeah,
year, and
yeah.
yeah, it's the thing is that for me, I had this overwhelming negativity, that the self talk that would continue in my brain. And it kept me very isolated throughout my childhood. We moved around a lot because my dad kept losing jobs. And we go
As a
from one
result of the
town to
alcoholism?
another. Pardon me?
As a result of the alcoholism, is
Yeah,
that?
yeah. As
Yeah,
soon
yeah.
as
Okay.
as soon as we got rooted someplace, like literally every 2 years, we'd be somewhere else, and I live in
Cycles.
another town, and it's
Yeah,
very hard to make friends that way when you know you're going to go.
yeah.
So I established and especially when your parents are at home, yelling and screaming and punching each other in the jaw, you don't want friends over. It's
Yeah,
not a good place to you don't feel good about bringing folks home to meet the parents.
yeah,
So
right.
I kind of stayed isolated. I stayed to myself through my most of my childhood. Made some friends in high school
Yeah.
that I ended up keeping, for at least for some period of time. But by then, my parents were split, and we were bouncing between my mom and my dad. And one day when I was in high school, I got stoned with a friend of mine, and
Marijuana? Or,
it was marijuana, yeah.
yeah,
And
okay.
so here we are, and back in those days, it wasn't like you could go to a dispensary and say, "Hey, give me an ounce." You can do
Yeah,
that now. It's amazing. But I'm very grateful that they didn't have that back in my day because it would have made it too easy.
yeah,
The thing is, we would get together and do all kinds of outdoor stuff and try to get in touch with nature and try to, kind of find uh, a power greater than ourselves. I always felt that I was on this spiritual quest in my loneliness in my childhood, and I found some friends that were kind of into that. But we had one friend that kept saying, "Hey, why don't we try some of this? This will help accelerate the process." So we tried some of that, and the next thing you know, my friend and I were looking in the mirror and laughing and laughing and laughing, and it was the greatest feeling of freedom. I remember we went out that night to see a band, and the keyboard player had this like shrunken head hanging off of his microphone, and I'm just like looking at the shrunken head and like, oh, this is like the coolest thing ever. And
Can I ask, Don, what year-ish would this have been?
That year would have been, okay, so I will date myself and tell you that it was probably around 1972.
Okay. So I'm just trying to get a proper image of this, right? Like, are we at the disco, or are we at the, the soda shop or whatever? I don't know.
No, this was like 70s, when the 60s and 70s rock was. My hair was down to about here, and maybe all the way down to there. I had a lot of hair back then, and it was just so great to go. Just be able to just be in the moment. And I felt that I was in the moment. But I will tell you that I was immediately addicted. And I won't say that marijuana has the same kind of addiction potential as, say, alcohol or
opiates or all those things, right?
Yeah, it wasn't like that. It was the fact that as soon as I did it, I wanted to do it again and again.
The altered reality
again,
more than
exactly. And I wanted to be in that state all the time.
Yeah.
I wanted to be in that state forever. So and then I discovered that, back in those days, again, you couldn't go to the dispensary, so we'd have to find a dealer somewhere who had some pot, some cannabis. And if we didn't find somebody, I was freaking miserable. Already, I was miserable without it. Like the weekend wasn't as good of a weekend. And before that, I could at least enjoy myself outside in nature when I was straight. Well, now I had to be stoned in order to enjoy life. And that worked out really well, That worked out really well until we got busted. We were arrested. And I was sent to a night. I spent the night in Bridgeport jail. Now, Bridgeport, Connecticut, is a town known for its sort of tough crime and very inner city. And I spent a night in that jail with some very tough people, and it was one of the worst nights and scariest nights of my life. So after that, every time I got stoned, all of a sudden I'm like looking behind me because I'm afraid the cops are going to get me again, and I'm going to end up back in jail.
Ruined it for you. It ruined it for you.
Paranoia. And so,
hey, Ashes to awesome listeners. The following PSA is brought to you by the Phoenix. The Phoenix is not just a gym. It's a community where the real weight lifted is not just barbells, but hearts, minds, and spirits. Whether you're in recovery or simply choose to live a sober lifestyle, the Phoenix offers a range of activities from yoga to hiking, all led by people who've walked a path of transformation. So why not aim higher with the Phoenix? The first membership requirement is just 48 hours of sobriety. Rise from the ashes today and soar with the Phoenix. Hey listeners, let's take a moment to talk about something crucial. Carrying naloxone. This life-saving medication can reverse an opioid overdose in minutes. You might think, I don't need it. I'm not around opioids, but the truth is you'll never know when you'll be in a situation where you could save a life. It's easy to use, and many places offer it for free or at a low cost. So let's be prepared and look out for each other. Remember, you might not plan on being around opioid use, but you never know when it'll be around you, and you could save the life of somebody that is loved. This is Jared Blaine with the Blacklist Podcast, and remember, you are loved.
And so, after that, I did not enjoy getting stoned. But one thing I would not do, and it's, this is a common thread I hear in people's stories sometimes, is that, they say, well, I'm not going to be like my dad, or I'm not going to be like my mom. And I'd see my dad, and he was, he'd be at home, standing at the counter with a big puss on, coming home from work, drinking his vodka, getting smashed, smoking his cigarettes, and he was a miserable man. And I said, well, one thing I'm not going to do is drink, because you're just miserable when you drink, because that was the example that I saw. But what happened was I ended up going to college, and during my time at college, I helped build a radio station. I was
Okay.
one of the founding members of a radio station called WNHU.
Okay.
And we went on the air in 1973, as a matter of fact. And that
Where
kind
do
of,
those call letters come from? I'm going to interrupt you and go totally off course for a second.
oh yeah,
Where do the
WNHU, it was the University of New Haven. But I
Okay.
think University of New Hampshire already had WUNH, so we made it WNHU.
So they are an arbitrary thing. Like you do decide what they're going. Like you decide what your call letters are going to be. I always thought it had something to do with the signal or the radio world or regulations, or I had no idea. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah,
Right? Just like-
when it comes,
yeah.
one of the projects I had to do in college was my graduate thesis was how to build a radio station. And
Okay.
you had to do, back then, you had to do a frequency search to get a frequency on the FM dial that would not interfere with other
Okay.
frequencies around you, and then you'd had to get the appropriate call letters, and and then
Okay,
go through
okay,
a certain process.
Yeah,
So,
okay. Sorry to
so I was involved in
sidebar
building
you.
the radio station,
Yeah.
literally hammer and nail, but I was still I was not only withdrawn and insecure, that the feelings I talked about earlier, but now I was also feeling very paranoid because of my experience getting busted, and feeling very isolated, feeling alone in myself. Before that I had kind of enjoyed being alone, but now I was just alone and scared all the time. But I showed up. I don't know what it was that got me into this radio station, other than the fact that I loved music so much. And I wanted to be involved in music because that was one of the few things that would comfort me, that would
Yeah.
help me feel okay. Was listening to music. I mean, music had a very strong meaning for me. Growing up with the Beatles and the Beach Boys and the '60s bands and then into the '70s, it was very meaningful for me. So to have the chance to be involved in a radio station and play music on the air, being an announcer, but nobody would have to see me because I was very insecure about my looks and all that kind of stuff. That really appealed to me. So I showed up when it said, hey, we need volunteers to help build the station. And I just showed up, and I was very quiet, and had my long hair, kind of hiding my face, and I ended up, they gave me a hammer and nails, and I started building the station. And but I still kind of kept to myself. One night, these guys that were with me tapped me on the shoulder, and am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because on my end it looks like I may have frozen a little, but anyway,
Okay.
they tapped me on the shoulder and they said, "Hey, Don, we're going out for pizza. You want to join us?" And I said, "Sure," because just a chance to be with other people, although I was kind of scared, but I went. And we went out to Sally's, local pizza place. Some of the New Haven, by the way, if you ever come to New Haven, Connecticut, I will take you to Sally's for pizza, or Pepe's,
Okay.
or Zupardi's, or Modern.
Oh.
We have some of the best pizza in the world. In fact, there's a documentary about it called Pizza, a Love Story. And it's got folks like Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick talking about New Hampshire, New Haven pizza being the best. Lyle Lovett says New Haven pizza is the best. It's a pretty cool documentary. Anyway, we went out
every day. Yeah.
we went out to Sally's, and
Yeah.
and they were ordering beer. So I wanted to fit in, so I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll have one of those." So I had a Miller beer, and I drank the Miller. It was pretty good. So I said, I'll have another one. So I drank the second one, and that was even better than the first one. But it was the third Miller. The third Miller, about halfway through that third Miller, the magic happened. And suddenly, that freedom that I had when I was smoking pot and laughing in front of the mirror, it was like that on steroids. All of a sudden, holy mackerel, I felt the fear went away, that insecurity went away, that feeling of isolation, and all of a sudden I started conversing, and I started feeling comfortable, and I started feeling pretty good about myself, and I started thinking like, hey, maybe I'm not such a bad guy after all, and everything changed.
If I can interrupt, Don, I always ask about that first time someone got loaded, and of course now you're older than most people are that I talk to, right, when they have that first experience, at least. So your answer could be very different. Were you self-aware enough at the time to understand the significance of what had just happened, or was it just that you really liked it, and it's with the benefit of hindsight that you're able to say, these are the things it did for me?
It's probably more the hindsight. My first sponsor always used to tell me, hindsight is 20/20. And
it is.
I wasn't thinking at the time, oh, this is it. But as I think back on it, I was feeling this is it.
Okay.
Because all of a sudden I'm comfortable in my own skin for the first time.
Yes.
And then
that right there is the common thread, as you've heard enough recovery stories to know. But
And so I got that feeling, and like most of people who then fall into addiction, is I wanted to have more of that. And I wanted to have it again and again and again. And so I spent the next 10 years chasing that third Miller feeling.
I'll ask you another question, Don, that I've never asked before because it's never occurred to me till now. Did you want more of that, or did you want less of what was before? That's kind of a did you win the game or did they lose it kind of question, I know, but
I definitely wanted less or none of what was before.
Fair enough. Okay.
But I also wanted more of what I was feeling. And
so maybe it's one of those questions
because the feeling, that feeling kind of replaced the old feelings. But then the time I spent, so I'd keep looking for that third Miller feeling, but I'd work towards it, and then I'd always go past. Because it always, when I'd get to that third Miller or fourth Miller, eventually it took 10 Millers to get there. But it's like, okay, well, that feels pretty good, so I better have another one. And then I'd always go past. And then I'd always, it got worse and worse and worse to the point, just like any other story, I went so far past that I never came back. I ended up in that feeling of fear and insecurity and now it's turned into self-loathing, self-hatred, and that got worse and worse and worse because now not only do I have those feelings, I have this freaking monkey on my back called alcohol that is something that I need. I need it I went past the point of I need it to feel better. Now I need it just to freaking exist.
Yeah, just to not feel.
Seeking a path to heal from trauma? Discover Yatra Center in Phuket, Thailand. Yatra specializes in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, a groundbreaking therapy transforming lives globally. Why choose Yatra? Nestled in the tranquility of Phuket, Thailand, Yatra offers both online outpatient services and immersive residential programs. Their expert therapists ensure that traumatic memories are processed, becoming less intense and more manageable. Research-backed and globally recognized, Yatra's EMDR approach doesn't just ease the pain, it targets the very core, facilitating deep healing. Whether you're at home or at their serene center, Yatra paves your way from trauma to tranquility. Don't let the past overshadow your present. Choose Yatra, transform pain into strength, and step into a brighter future. Visit yatracenter.com and embark on your healing journey.
exist.
Yeah. Just to not feel terrible.
Yes.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So so that's kind of like
with all of the substance.
Yes.
With all of them, I feel like at some point it's a snake eating its tail, and when that happens, who knows? But do I use a substance because I'm depressed, or am I depressed because I use a substance? And I think that at some point for all of us, that shift happens, and where it's just now it's a snake eating its tail. It doesn't even matter anymore. Right, like what happened first, because they're all happening together, and it sucks. Right, if I can, interject that into the story, or
I agree, and you and I had a little conversation about this, about trauma, and
yeah.
what I was trying to compensate for was, that feeling of being a poor kid. I was trying to compensate.
Sorry, it's not funny. It's just when you say it.
And it's like, I was,
poor.
I was, I was trying to erase that, and it ended up erasing me. It ended up turning against me. That's what That's what we know.
I feel a meme
alcohol
coming
and
on
drugs
with that
do,
one.
right? They turn against us.
Yes.
Our best friend
Yeah.
becomes our worst enemy. But once it's our worst enemy, it's got us, by the throat. And it had me by the throat. It had me by the, it had me by all my parts.
I'm actually, what I'm doing is I'm just writing down what you just said. I was trying to erase it, and it erased me because I'm like, there's a meme in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm just taking a quick note of that before I forget. So
yeah, and it's holy mackerel. The way substance abuse works. We abuse the substance, but the substance is abusing us. The substance has the control, not us. It wasn't that I wanted, to abuse alcohol and, make my life what it was. It got so that I needed that abuse. I needed the alcohol to beat me down night after night after night,
Right.
just so I could freaking pass out and, get
Which
a
is funny.
night's rest.
I often, when speaking to the loved ones of people in addiction, because our show focuses heavily on the loved ones, it's something I take a lot of pride in, and for all sorts of different reasons. But when I'm speaking to the loved one of somebody who's in addiction, I try to. We weren't doing anything to you; we were doing it to ourselves, and unfortunately, it affected you in a terrible way. But what we're doing this to ourselves first and foremost, and it's awful, right? It's awful, the things that we're doing. You're just, the way you spoke about that now really made me think about, and yeah, it does. It affects your parents, your kids, your siblings, your spouses, all of those things, right? But first and foremost, you're doing it to yourself, and I think maybe people could find a comfort in that, right? I'm not intentionally doing this to you. I'm doing it to myself, and you're being hurt by it, and that sucks, right? So go ahead, though. Sorry, I tend to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I think, right? Because I think you're bringing up valid points that, it's not just the fact that the alcohol was abusing me, then I in turn abused my own relationships because, all I wanted was the next drink. Now, I was fortunate in that I went through that for about 10 years. And for the first half of that time, 3/4 of that time, I was in college, and then I was in a rock and roll band. I put together a rock and roll band when I was in college, and so I was playing music, and it was sex and drugs and rock and roll, right? So, I was able to have my drug of choice, which was that Miller or a gin and tonic. I had it on my desk, right, at work, because my work was my amplifier. My amplifier was there, and I had a beer on my desk at all times. And that was fine, because it went with the lifestyle that I was living, that I was pursuing, And I had, like those folks that I built the radio station with, they knew I was starting a band. They knew that I was, pursuing a music career, and that when I graduated from college, I was going off to be a rock star. And that was a big part of my bottom, was the fact that when we had our 10-year reunion of building the radio station, going on the air, we had a 10-year reunion, and that was actually the date, to put dates in context. We went on the air on June 4th, 1973, and we had our 10-year reunion on June 4th, 1983. And that day, I got up. This was my life at that time. That day, I got up, and I had already, the band I was in had kicked me out. They kicked me out because, I was showing up late for practice. I was sloppy on stage. I was a mess. And so they literally kicked me out of the band that I had helped to start. And thank God they did, even though that's one of the very interesting things about recovery is the hindsight, the 2020 hindsight, is that I can look back and see all the times that when I thought it was the worst day of my life, it was really the best day of my life. The fact when they kicked me out of that band, if they hadn't done that, I'd probably be dead today. So they did me a big favor by kicking me out. And I ended up in a career with Subway sandwiches, the world's largest fast food chain, which was a...
Is that, they're still the largest fast food chain?
Yeah, and...
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay,
and with the... with the, at the time it was a small company, but our band used to do commercials. We used to do jingles for Subway. And the name of the band was The Crayons. And, I talk about this periodically.
Now, when you were on Jared's show, he got to see the crayon in the background. I don't even get to see it.
Right.
I feel a little bit...
I was down in my studio. I'm up in my office today. And I thought I'd be a more stately background or something. But the thing was, with being the orange crayon and having an orange car and orange hair and orange clothes and living in Orange, Connecticut, that had become my dream and my lifestyle. And we were doing commercials for Subway, and having that as our biggest hit wherever we played. But when they kicked me out of the band, what could I do? What am I going to do now? So I wrote for some music publications. I stayed active in the music business, but it wasn't until the guy that promoted us gave me a call and said, "Hey, you went to college, right? You have a degree in communications, right? We need a PR guy and a franchise sales guy and a company photographer and an editor. Could you come and work for us?"
Might even be somebody to fill the water coolers.
Exactly. And I had
a company that small at the time.
I had not had any better offers, so I was, so then I became like my dad, who I despised, because now here I was, standing at that same counter, that kitchen counter that he would stand at, miserable, drinking his vodka, and where I was enjoying my gin and tonics and my Millers, but by that time I had switched to cheap vodka like he was drinking. I was drinking the same Majorska vodka he was drinking, and I was coming home and I was miserable, and I was just like him. And I swore I would not. When I found the magic of the third Miller, I thought I had found the answer, and guess what? I ended up just like him. And that and that's such a common story.
Wow.
And it's such a shame, because there was much more to my dad than his alcoholism, but that's the part of him that I tend to talk about. And there was a lot more to me than my alcoholism, which I could not find, I could not discover until after I put down the drink.
Yeah. Wow. That realization that you're like your dad, when does that happen?
It was, at some point during, not long after I was working at Subway. In fact, it was almost immediate, because I had to put on a tie and sit at a desk, and I just like he was, and I knew that alcohol wasn't doing me any favors, but I had gotten to the point where I couldn't stop. And so that last 2 years of my drinking, the first 2 years I worked at Subway, the last 2 years which were the last 2 years of my drinking career. And I drink, and I ended up going to, after 2 years at Subway, I ended up going to the reunion of the radio station. So this is now, fast forward, we're in 1983. It's June 4th, 1983. And the last thing I remember that day, that morning I'd gotten up, which was my routine. I'd gotten up, I poured myself a little bit of orange juice and a lot of vodka. I'd drink it down. Sometimes it would stay down, sometimes it would come back up, so I'd have to go have another drink. But I had to do that just to get to work, and then, so that morning I had gotten up and I had my vodka and orange juice, but it was a Saturday, so I went to this reunion, and I went there feeling, that emptiness, that fear, that insecurity, that I had been feeling before I even discovered alcohol, before I even discovered pot, before I discovered drugs. Just that fear that I had grown up with now had been multiplied. Yep. And now it was worse than ever, because I had the monkey on my back, the devil on my shoulder, demon alcohol. Demon alcohol was with me all the time, and had to be with me all the time, because that's the only way I could get through a day. So I went to that reunion feeling that I was a complete and utter failure. Now, if you looked at me from the outside, you say, hey, he's got, a pretty good career at this sandwich franchise, and, he had a career as a rock musician, and, I guess he's doing all right. But I went to that, I felt so empty inside and so fearful, and so much like I didn't become the rock star that I told them I would become, and I had failed. And then here I am at this reunion trying to look like I was confident and successful, inside feeling like a miserable failure. And the last thing I remember at that reunion was being in a restaurant. We had been at the university. We went to a restaurant for dinner and drinks. I'm in the bathroom of the restaurant. I'm on the toilet. I'm snorting a line of cocaine off of the back of the toilet. I throw up in the toilet, and all I can think is, I need another drink. And I left, and I remember leaving the bathroom, and as I'm leaving the bathroom, I went into a blackout. And I was told many years later that I was driving down the Boston Post Road, Route 1, in Connecticut, which is a very high-trafficked road with a lot of traffic lights. I was driving down that road at 70 miles an hour, and they tried to follow me to make sure I was safe, but they gave up because I was driving like a maniac, and they didn't want to really, do the same thing. So, I ended up in a blackout. I ended up, I didn't know where I was the next day. I kind of got through that day, and the next day I went to work, and I hit my bottom.
The following is a national emergency.
A new study out shows there may be gross underreporting of opioid-related deaths.
Canada's opioid crisis, overdose deaths have been caused by toxic supply of street drugs.
Devastating effects on families and communities across this country.
One Canadian dies approximately every 53 minutes to overdose. That's 27 deaths every day and 837 deaths each month. That makes 405% more deaths to overdose than car accidents in 2022. Are you listening now? So who does this affect? Everyone from pro athletes to celebrities to business people and kids. This crisis affects us all, with 77% of overdoses happening in people's homes. So how did we get here?
These drugs were designed to ease pain but their overuse has caused hundreds of thousands of Canadians to become addicted.
Most addictions begin with prescription opiates, but later shift to unregulated substances like heroin and fentanyl due to availability and cost. This is a huge problem.
The vast majority of overdose deaths are caused by a toxic street drug supply.
The National Overdose Response Service is a 24-hour phone line providing anonymous support for substance users. NORS will co-create safety plans, dispatch EMS, or contact someone to administer naloxone without involving EMS. Please don't use alone. If using in the USA, please call Never Use Alone and download the Brave app.
So that was the last drink you took, or when you started?
Yeah. So the next,
recovery?
yeah.
It's quite often they're very different.
Yeah. You know, I'd gone to work, and again, now I have that behind me, and now all I can think is, not only am I a miserable failure, and I'm going back to this miserable job, but all my old college friends now see me for the miserable failure I am, because I don't know what I did or what I said. That's or heavy. Any of that. All I knew is that it was clear to them, in my mind, that I was an abject failure, that I was, just so I'd gone so far down, the road, and down into the skids.
Yeah.
And so that morning, I went through the routine of the vodka and the orange juice and got to work. And my boss came in that morning, and I always tell the story that there are witnesses that are still around today that can tell you that he asked me a question, but he was standing over. I was sitting at my desk, and he was like standing over me, and in my mind, he started to scream at me. Everybody else said all he did was ask me a question. But I heard him screaming at me, and I stood up, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "You're right, I'm a fuck-up." And there was a jelly donut on the desk that the secretary had left for Monday morning. It was a Monday morning. Hey, happy Monday. I picked up the jelly donut, I threw it against the wall, and it just slowly slid down, just like my life. Yeah. And I watched that jelly donut go down the wall. I screamed, and I walked out, got into my car, got my bottle of Majorska vodka out from under the seat, took a couple of swigs, and by that afternoon, through a series of circumstances, I, thought I was going nuts. I called a few mental health places, and next thing you know, I'm in rehab. And that was the date of my last drink. It was June 6th, 1983. So it's been 40 years since my last drink.
40 years of clarity and connections and in service, quite obviously, right? That's amazing. It's amazing.
It's been an incredible life for the last 40 years. I just covered my first 29 years, but the next 40 years was much better.
It's impossible to quantify 40 years and how many lives you may have touched. This is something that I've just recently started to talk about on the show quite a bit, because you just don't know, right? You don't know by going on the blacklist or by going on this or any other podcast how many lives you might touch. You don't know how many people's lives you touch by sharing your story. And here's the thing too, like were you a 12-stepper? And I mean, there's an anonymous thing there. So if you shared your story in those rooms,
I do practice a 12-step program. And I've done that for the last 40 years, and I still do today.
So there's a delayed effect, at least there was for me. I still remember a Narcotics Anonymous meeting in Social Detox. There was the person that the institutional service, I can't remember the term, that she would come in and lead, NA meetings. And I remember she's friends with as a matter of fact, when I go back to Moose Jaw to see my family this next week, I'm going to go with her to that detox, to share a meeting with her. And I'm like, thinking about that now, it just makes me like, whoa, right? But my point to all of this, I remember her, like in the moment, I relapsed 3 or 4 times after that stay at detox. But I still remember very clearly her story being the one that was the first one I'd ever connected with. It was like, you get it, So again, after 40 years, you can't even begin. It's impossible because you can never know how many delayed reactions there were to your story, how many, and it's that's got to be an amazing feeling if you really stop and think about that. And I don't know if you have or if you do or whatever, or if you're more humble than that. But man, I can only begin to imagine how many people.
I had an experience of that, and it was when I did. Okay. You had mentioned at the beginning of the show, Undercover Boss. So here I was on national television as the subway boss. And, it was, yes. I think that night, it was right after a football game, so they had a particularly good viewership that night. And it was something like 15 million people tuned in. That's back when a lot of people would tune into network television. And
yes.
And this was about 12 years ago. So I was, on the show they asked me, they asked me to tell my story, my life story, yeah. And then so what part of the
origin story, use, if you will, right?
And so I thought, I thought, I consciously thought, I've got an opportunity here where I can talk about being in recovery or not. Which do I want to do? And I thought about, the traditions of the 12-step program I'm involved in. I knew I couldn't talk about that. But there was nothing saying I couldn't talk about being in recovery. So I talked about it. I talked about that meltdown that I had at the office. I talked about rehab. I talked about getting sober. And I talked about, the fact that I had been in recovery for a long period of time. And how much that was part of my life, because it was, it's an essential part of my life. In fact, it's the priority in my life, because without recovery, anything I put in front of my recovery, I will lose. So, I need to always keep that my top priority. So I talked about that, and a number of things happened as a result after that show aired. But for me, the most important one, other than the fact that I got involved with the Phoenix, was that this guy, Harold, reached out to me. Harold Andrews was his name, and is his name. And he wrote me a wonderful letter. And it was, it was just basically that, he had been, shaky. He had been squirrely. He had been sober for 2 weeks. And he came to the conclusion that because he had a felony on his record and, because he was a drunk and, what's the point? He's sitting there alone watching TV thinking, I think I'm going to go out and have a beer. And he's looking at the door, and then he looks back to the TV, and guess who's on the TV? I'm there talking about being in recovery. And he listens to me, and he said, he wrote a beautiful letter to me, and he said, just the fact that you were willing to talk about it, overcome the stigma and talk about being in recovery. And the fact that if you are, a big wig, a big executive in this huge corporation, if you can get to there, then I can at least get a job back in my field, because he thought he would never get another job. And that meant the world to him, that it's possible for him to get another job. And I ended up, I sent him an email back. He had emailed me, and I emailed him back. And I said, thanks so much for your wonderful letter, and good luck. But inside, I was so deeply touched because I thought it helped this guy. It helped keep this guy sober another day. And
right,
that's what it's all about. The fact that, we've got to talk about this. We've got to put it out in the open. We've got to talk about not just addiction, because, there are plenty of pictures of, the drunks in the gutter, or the addict, in the shooting gallery with the needle hanging out of his arm. People see that all the time, but people need to see what recovery looks like. They got to see what Chuck looks like. They got to see what Jared looks like. They got to see what Don looks like after they have found recovery, because anything is possible. You're going to Thailand, Jared's living, we're all living our lives in recovery, and it's a beautiful thing. We're good, productive members of society now. And Harold saw that, and he said, I can do that too. I can be in recovery, and I can get a job, and I can be a productive member of society. And today, Harold is sober for 12 years. And
congratulations, Harold, if you happen to catch this. Congratulations.
On an episode of Undercover Boss, because we did there was a second episode 2 years later, and it was called Epic Bosses, and it was like just 10 short stories of some of the bosses, like where are they now, and when they called me and said that we're interested in doing this, what happened as a result of you being on the show? I said, well, there's this guy Harold, and I told him about it. Next thing I know, they're flying Harold he lived in Indiana, and they flew Harold into Connecticut. And we met on national television. We're hugging, and he's crying, and we sat on a park bench and had a talk. And I got to hang out with Harold. We went out to dinner. Yeah. It was an incredible experience, and we're still, today we're still Facebook friends, and we talk every now and then. It's really great.
Yeah. That's wonderful, man. That's heartwarming, to say the least, right? Yesterday, when we first spoke on the phone, I told you about the Shattered Stigma project on our website for the blog post. Oh, and I showed you that post. As a matter of fact, I did from Tammy Preston. So for me, much like perhaps yourself in that moment, validity of purpose. Everything we do with Ashes to Awesome was just like, you're making a difference out there, and just that one person, if you can get that one person's attention, that's all it takes to make all of it worthwhile, right?
Yeah. So I don't know that I can't quantify how many people you have listened to Ashes to Awesome and said, oh, I can do this, or they've listened to The Blacklist, or they've listened to something I said, but just know that if we've touched somebody and saved a life, what an amazing thing that is. Because each life counts. Right. And I think that's one of the important things to remember also, because one of the things we get involved in, I was looking at the stats, and I had been looking at the Phoenix, and one of the things when I was on the board of the Phoenix, one of the things we are, what we do is we build sober, active community, right? We help people to rise from the ashes, just like you do. Yep. Ashes to Awesome. We help people rise from the ashes.
Yep.
You have Phoenix in your logo. You have I loved the thing you sent me, the picture of the two phoenixes, like with their headphones on.
That's our new Facebook header, right? Yeah. That's AI. Thank you to AI for that one. AI and some creativity on my part too. But
and we've got here's our Phoenix, right? So the whole Phoenix thing is Yeah,
it's the
it
perfect
is.
metaphor.
And the thing is, what we do is we help people by providing a sober, active community. And all somebody has to do is have 48 hours of clean time, and they can come to a Phoenix event. And the interesting thing about the Phoenix events, I mean, I was just being reminded of what we're doing. I started with the Phoenix after the founder of the Phoenix, his brother actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, we got this little organization and we want to grow. And you helped Subway to grow. Could you help us to grow? And you're in recovery, so you understand recovery. So I think it would be perfect. A really great match." So I went out. They were in Denver, and they had a chapter in Denver, and they had a gym out there, and they were doing CrossFit and bicycling and rock climbing and hiking, and it's that mind body connection, right? You do good physical active stuff, and it kind of helps clear your mind, gets the endorphins going, but most importantly, you do it with somebody else, and you connect. The active, the main word is sober, active community. You join a community, you get to meet people, you get to connect with like-minded people. And
Absolutely.
they had this beautiful model of what they were doing, but they said, well, how do we expand this out? So we took some of the Subway philosophy of, where we have developers in different places, we're very decentralized, and we put program coordinators in different places around the country, and those folks recruited volunteers. The same way we would recruit franchisees, they recruit volunteers. And now we literally have thousands of volunteers. And dig this, we're now in 48 states. They were just in Colorado 12 years ago. Now 48 states, 278 counties. We're in Canada. We're in England. And we have
where in Canada, if I can ask?
I think it's in the Toronto area, but I should get that information out to you. We and we've now served 318,000 people.
Wow,
that's a big number.
Wow, right?
And we talked about that at one of our board meetings. I ended up helping them out. Then I joined the board of directors. Then I was the board chair for 3 years. And now I'm starting an impact board with them to kind of expand the reach of the Phoenix. So I'm still involved.
Okay.
And, I look at what we're doing. We not only have in-person events all over the country, we also have virtual programming, and we have, and guess what?
I saw
it's
that.
all free.
Yeah.
Anybody comes to an event, you can do CrossFit for free.
Amen.
You can go, bicycling, rock climbing for free. It's free. We depend on donors. We depend on outside donors that keep us going forward, and grants and things like that. But we continue to provide,
of course,
free programming, and we have virtual programming online. We have on-demand programming. Things are just always there that you can do a yoga class 24/7, whenever you want. And all you have to do, here's my commercial, is download the Phoenix app. Just go to the App Store, wherever you get your apps, and download the Phoenix app. Sober.
No kidding. Well, and I'll put a link to both Apple and Android stores in the show notes for that as well. Right?
We've got, this is where all the numbers are, but it's yoga, meditation, group fitness, boxing, rock climbing, mountain biking, CrossFit, road biking, running, walking, hiking, socials, dance, book club, and guess what? In the last 2 years, we started branching out into music, and as you know, I
saw that part. I think
I
that's
have a big
really
music
cool,
connection,
right?
as you know.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you, we did a sober active space at the at the Newport Folks Festival, and we've done that at a number of other festivals as well. And
the
yeah,
Dopey Connection,
and so
or Dopey,
I met Dave from
DopeyCon,
the Dopey podcast.
Dopey.
Dave and I got to be buds
yeah.
because I went to the Park City Song Summit in Utah. We had a presence there, and Dave was doing some interviews, and I was introduced to him, so we kind of got to know each other. And I went to DopeyCon, and I love what he's doing too.
Well, I'll tell you what, Don. I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I got to do a quick PSA here that I was kind of overdue for a while back. So I'm just going to run it right now, real quick, and then we'll get right back to this conversation. And actually, I want to talk to you about Dave from Dopey as well. So that's kind of a neat thing that happened with him. And as we wait for this to catch up to itself and have an awkward moment.
Now,
come on now. There we are.
Public service announcement. One of the best ways to reduce stigma is with education. If you still have questions that we haven't answered on today's show, you can learn more about Together We Can's education group at twcrecoverylife.org.
Hi everybody, this is Carl with today's public service announcement about naloxone, or, as it's more commonly known, Narcan, a medication that can help save the life of somebody experiencing an opioid overdose. Did you know that in 2021 opioids were responsible for over 7,000 deaths in Canada and 106,000 deaths in the United States? These numbers are staggering, but there is hope. Narcan is a medication that can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose and help save a life. Narcan is available for free at participating pharmacies and harm reduction centers across Canada, and is also available without a prescription at most pharmacies in the United States. Now, I know most of you won't be around people using opioids, but you never know when it will be around you, and you could save the life of someone who is loved and who loves.
The girl at the end is my cousin, Jessie, and she is the first Memorial Monday we ever did on the show. We used to do them weekly, and Mom and I did that by accident, and it turned out to be this crazy phenomenon. But I couldn't do it anymore. We still do them, but we don't do them every week because it became too much, just too much to take on, right? With every one of those episodes, there's another friend on my Facebook list who's lost their person, and who speaks to me daily, and so it just, the compound effect of it was just a little too much. So we had to back away from doing it weekly. But please carry Narcan, right? You just don't know. You just don't know, right? I'll speak to that real quick, Don. The last memorial episode I did with Joy, I can't remember her last name, it was a couple of weeks ago. She's lost her son to fentanyl poisoning. And let's be honest, they're poisonings, they're not overdoses. And she herself looks out her front window, and there's a big line of cars leading up to a stop sign. And she's like, oh, that's weird. So she goes out a minute later, it's still going on. And so she walks up to the car. There's a guy slumped over in the driver's seat at the stop sign. He's overdosing right there on the street. Doesn't she run in and get her Narcan? And they save this guy's life right there. Like, this is somebody, like, what are the odds of that happening? Right. Well, unfortunately, they're better and better all the time. But the point is, you just don't know when it's going to be around you. And for something that's free and easy to carry and have around, why wouldn't you? Right. So please get some Narcan, guys, right. If you're listening, and keep it around, because every life matters. You just said that. So Dave from Dopey. Dave has more to do with this show than anybody who isn't actually on the Ashes to Awesome team, period. In its origin story. Yes. So when I first started out, back in January of this year, I called it the Dopey Canuck. And at the time, I justified that all sorts of different ways to myself. Very, very early into recovery at that point. A couple months into it, I get a message from Dave. What the hell? He's not happy. And I'm like, well, whatever. It's Dopey. Dopey's a Disney thing. It's Canada. It's not there. Don't worry. You're stressing out. And we kind of got adversarial for a minute. And then he told me the why. He takes it so personally because of his friend that passed away. And, I'm sure you know that story. And I was like, okay, I get it now. So 3 days later, I was rebranded to Ashes to Awesome. But it was in that time that I found my why as well. Like I was telling stupid, funny stories, and it didn't feel good the way this does. benefit of hindsight, it was shitty. It was just kind of glamorizing an old lifestyle that I didn't want to glamorize anymore. I've since deleted a lot of those episodes because they're so far off mission from what we do now, right? But Dave was hands down, like, if it's not for him, I might not have rebranded. I might not have found our purpose the way that we found it. And he was gracious. He came on to the show very shortly after that. He was the first guest I'd ever had on the show. And I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Not a clue. But this man is a consummate professional throughout the entire thing. I knew how big he was, but until I've grinded it out now for 10 more months, I didn't really realize what that meant, right? And who he really was, and now that I put the kind of work I have, and I'm not kidding when I say 12 to 16 hours a day, every single day. I have not taken days off, right? So I have a whole new respect for Dave and what Dave's done and the community that Dave has built and the impact he has on people's lives every day. And the impact he had on my show. So that's the dopey story for how it relates back to Ashes to Awesome. I'm going to get him back on one of these days when I can actually do something like that justice. Like it was audio only. It was crap, right? He handled himself like a pro, and he's definitely didn't say a lot of things that came to his mind, I'm sure. But right? But he's a genuine, authentic human being. So
No, well, I got to say, I've never known Dave to hold back his opinion. So it's he
was being nice, I think, at that point.
He is an interesting guy, and I think that he kind of went through that same process because when he was first doing the show with his partner. That's a lot of what it was. It was like laughing about all the crazy stuff we did when we were stoned or drunk or whatever under the influence, and kind of talking about the insanity of this disease of addiction or substance use disorder. But after his partner died, it was very clear that. There needed to be more discussion of the recovery element and what that's about, and whereas there's still humor and there's still fun, but there's also the serious side of it too, and I think he's really found a unique balance there, and here's how things all connect. You know Dave, I know Dave, so we know the same people. You and I both know Jared. But while we started talking about Dave, and then you did the public service announcement, which talked about Narcan, and I actually have Narcan in my car that I carry around with me, that I got at DopeyCon. Because when I went to DopeyCon, they were, giving out Narcan, like, make sure you take this and make sure you use it.
Circle.
And it's like, I've got Narcan. I carry it all the time, thanks to Dave,
That's awesome. Art's absolutely awesome. That makes me happy, actually. It really does. It's Dave's quite the guy. Well, the whole space, the vast majority of the people I meet have been very. Maybe I overuse the word authentic sometimes, but it just seems to fit, right? I love it. I really do. And there's this kind of let's rise up together, right? And something I heard a while back, and kind of how Jared and I got to talking about some of the things I've talked to you about, the collaborations that we're working on right now, is competition happens at the bottom, collaboration happens at the top, right? And in my mind, podcasting itself has not even scratched the surface of the market it's going to take. Our genre being no exception to that rule. Why the hell would any of us compete? Why aren't we all helping each other build our brands and build these shows and spread the message? And, right? Like, there's so much good to be done. Right?
I think you make a very good point that needs further discussion, because what I've discovered when I had the recovery branches idea, which is, the idea there is, I mentioned this to you, but I'll tell the folks at home that the idea of putting post-treatment organizations together under kind of an organizational structure, where they have an association of sorts, and how that could empower a lot of the smaller organizations to grow and to learn from each other and getting everybody to work together. But whenever I've worked on that type of thing, I've found that one of the hardest things to get past, and I think it's one of the hardest things that we humans have to get past, is this thing called ego. And people become worried, like, oh, no.
Yep.
This is my idea. I don't want to share it. Or this is my organization. I don't want to dilute what we're doing.
The hell with that, man.
And what I've found is that it seems that so many people who have lost loved ones, especially when people have lost kids to opiate addiction or alcoholism or whatever else it might be, but have lost a loved one to substance use, their response often is, well, we need to help prevent this in the future, so let's start an organization.
Some sort of advocacy. Yeah.
So there are countless organizations out there, because just the size of the problem, so many people have started these foundations and these organizations, and they're all working in thousands of little vacuums. And if we could open up the vacuum and say, hey,
Tiny
I know
fish,
somebody that's doing something like what you're doing. Why don't the two of you talk together? Better yet, why don't 1,000 of us talk together and get together and talk about, how can we harness what we've created here and expand that to create more awareness, and instead of just all being in our little silos. And
What's the movie with Jason Bateman and Will Smith, where he puts the heart thing up on the moon? Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I don't know if I saw that one.
I can't remember. Will Smith is a superhero. Jason Bateman has got a mission very similar to what you're saying. It's You Care logo kind of thing, right? And he's trying to sell it to big corporations and saying, no, like, by having this on there, it just shows that you care. Like, so you're not giving us anything except an emblem to put on it. He's like, yeah. But by doing this, it shows that you care, and we can divert some money to this, and everyone's kicking him out their door. So at the end of the movie, Will Smith, doesn't he go and put the logo up on the moon for him? Because he's like Superman or whatever, right? So he goes and like chisels this into the moon. So all of a sudden, everybody wants this damn emblem on their corporation.
Yeah, well,
right?
there you go.
Very similar
so
to what
they even made a movie of it. So the idea of recovery branches, that there are so many different branches to recovery. There are many pathways to recovery, as my friends at CCAR say. There are, many avenues, and there are many people doing many things, but it's just like we really find strength when we connect. We find recovery when we connect. Now, if we could do that with the organizations and connect in that way, imagine the power. So it's one of those things.
Oh, right. If you could get 10,000 moms with their individual. Imagine that power that they have together, right? Because I can tell you, I've seen what one mom can do
absolutely
in the name
and
of her child.
Each one of them, I think about the person started Big Vision in New York, and she lost her son, and she's been doing an amazing job in growing that organization and bringing awareness. There's the Ziki Foundation here in Connecticut. They actually hold this golf outing every year. They do, and it's interesting because they hold a golf outing. I go to the golf outing every year. I talk to the folks that are there, and the folks are donating to the Ziki Foundation. For John Ziki lost his son to this disease, and they're giving most of the money to the Phoenix. because they see that if they give it to the Phoenix already has an organization, so we can expand outward. But that's just it. How do you make the we've got foundations that are raising money, but are they getting the most bang for the buck? One of the things I learned in business, because I worked for Fred DeLuca, the founder of Subway, and Fred DeLuca was famous for his, shall we say, frugality. He knew how to get the most out of every dollar. And he taught me that. And it seems to me that, there's a finite amount of money available for treatment, for advocacy, for legislation, for expanding the reach of treatment organizations and post-treatment organizations like the Phoenix, for podcasts. There's only so much money to go around.
Yeah.
But if we worked on things together, we could get more out of each of those dollars instead of just holding them to ourselves. And that's what I'd like to see someday. So I have this dream to make that happen at some point.
Don, I actually haven't. Oh, well, I think, you're talking to the right people so far, right? I mean, if we'd all work together, you never know what we can get done. I do have another podcast that you would not have heard of. I'm still trying very hard to grow it. It's called The Morning Cup of Kindness. So I don't know if you ever heard of one called The Morning Cup of Murder. It's top 0.25% in the world. It's 5-minute stories about murder every morning. I heard this and I was appalled. Right? What a horrible, horrible way. And I was like, maybe this is another name jacking of sorts. But I was like, no, this time I'm doing the right thing with it. I'm going to call it A Morning Cup of Kindness. It started out with me telling kindness stories. Somebody else that was close to me at the time. But then it took a shift here last month. I said, wait a minute. So now you can come on and promote any organization you want that's like a nonprofit or a fundraiser or some other good cause, right? It can't be your shoe company, whatever. And all you got to do is come on and tell a 5-minute story about kindness, and then you can take the last minute to discuss whatever that foundation or whatever that cause is, right? Absolutely free way to advertise. So what I had pictured, it's kind of this self-sustaining, self-growing, perpetuating thing of people telling stories about kindness for 5 minutes in the morning and spreading the word, right? About whatever the case is, right? So it's still something getting people to come on. Once people hear about it, they're all about it, but it's just tough with running another show and, you know what I mean, to try and get their word out. But I have no doubt that if I keep chipping away at it, it'll keep coming.
Yeah,
right?
and there are thousands
wonderful
of foundations there, but also
so far, right?
If you're building, as you bring these folks on, and build a list of who they are, then we can start networking them together.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely, and that one isn't just recovery and addiction space. That is whatever. If it's a good cause, come on, let's talk about it. Tell a story to brighten up everybody's day in the morning a little bit. 5 minutes of murder. Come on, do better, society.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. Go into what people really want. But I think what we have here is a very positive message, because this is all about saving lives, and that's one of the things that I continue to stress with my friends at the Phoenix and anybody else that will listen. I think about Harold and helping that one guy. And anything that we do, we can get lost in numbers. Like, the fact that the Phoenix has helped 318,000 people. That's great. But we can't just look at, then we got to get to 400,000, we got to get to 500,000. What we have to think about is each individual. That one person
every damn one
that is sick and suffering and needs us to give them a message of hope, whether that it's coming through a podcast or a treatment center or an AA meeting or wherever that message of, or the undercover boss, wherever that message of hope is coming from. We have to reach that individual. And certainly the more we can reach, the better. But we always have to keep, when I do these things, I'm thinking about that one person that's shaking and, like Harold was in front of the TV. And, how can we help this person? Are we reaching that person? So I'm hoping that this podcast reaches that person, the next Harold. And if it's more than one, so much the better. But, it's the individual that's important. Each one of us is important. Yeah. We can't forget that.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. True story. Hey, listen, I do want to talk a bit about gratitudes, not just the standard gratitude thing. It's kind of a whole thing that I want to talk about there real quick. Before we do that, though, I do have to be a bit self-serving and take this moment to plug my GoFundMe page for my trip to China, for my trip to Thailand. So I'll just talk about that real briefly with everybody. Where this comes from, folks, is Mike Miller from the Yacha Treatment Center in Thailand did an episode with me months ago. And at the end of that episode, he said, stop recording. And he says, man, you've got some trauma you need to deal with. And I went, oh, is that obvious to a professional, is it? And, so it kind of became self-conscious for a minute. But he extended me an incredibly generous offer and said that if I can get to Thailand, I can take him up on a scholarship there for 30 days of trauma treatment. I've got some big T, some little T traumas. If you don't know what that means, I think it's kind of obvious, but I've come a long way, but it's still paralyzing sometimes. And this is a really big deal for me to go find freedom from those things so I can continue doing what I'm doing is awesome. What he's talked me into is to stay once I get there because the cost of living makes this sustainable. Podcasting is not lucrative, at least not yet. Maybe someday it will be. I don't know. I'm just working on the message. And, there's as many months as not as I have to choose between rent and groceries. So I don't have a bunch of extra. I've just lost one of my sponsors because he ran out of money, which I feel horrible for. I'm going to keep pushing him, though, because he needs the help and he gave it to me when I needed it. But my income just took a big drop, and I'm about to be on the other side of the world with no money. So if you check out the show notes, if you go to the webpage or the socials, you'll see that there's a link to the GoFundMe. $5, $25, $100. You could absolutely help change my life. And I couldn't be more appreciative. So if you check that out, I'd be very, very appreciative of that, guys. So it's a hard thing to do to ask people for money, right? It really is. And I've become a little better at it this last week as my timeline shortens, right? So yeah, it is what it is. Let's talk about gratitudes before we segue out. So, Matt Keegan, do you know that name by chance? Oh.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I just I have to plug in my laptop because it was running out of power.
Oh, yeah, well, it's better you took that second than it would be.
Yeah, Matt Keegan.
I'm glad that you did.
I definitely know of Matt Keegan.
Yeah. Okay, so I love Matt, right? Oh, yeah, he's right in your part of the world, isn't he? Right? Yeah, I guess he is. So he's been on my show. He's been on the Blacklist as well. That was a crazy thing. I'll talk about that real quick too, because full circle thing. I'd heard of the Blacklist from Matt because his episode aired in between his recording with me and my airing of his episode with me. It was on the Blacklist, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to drop. I'm going to share your episode with me tomorrow, but right now my episode went live with Blacklist, so I got to make sure that I'm pushing that for him." I say, "Hey, yeah, no." Right. Less than a week later, he's on Hard Knocks Talks. Jared is from the Blacklist. A friend of mine up here in Canada is one of my mentors. And so I'm listening to him. I'm like, wow, I got to think this guy's really cool. Well, I go to find his show, and because of the way it's spelt, the BLAK, I can't find it nowhere. I end up listening to a TV show.
TV show, yeah, that's
podcast
when I was first trying to find the Blacklist. It was the same thing.
Yeah, right. So when we've had some conversations about that. I think we're going to see a new logo coming out of Jared as a result. But I ended up listening to this whole podcast about the Blacklist because I quite enjoyed that TV show. And once I started, I was on a walk, and once I started listening, I was like, oh, okay, here I am. I guess I'll have to find his show in the morning. I wake up the next day. What do I see on my Facebook? there's a message from Jared at the Blacklist. I hadn't even had a chance to check him out yet.
Wow.
And he's approaching me, right? So kind of one of those full circle things again, right? There's this, yeah, right? You can't tell me that's not meant to be, right? So, yep, I'll be on yours. So we've recorded for each other's shows. Of course, he's a bit of a show off with his 3 months ahead of recording schedule. So, right? I'm more of a shit, I need something for Friday and it's Thursday kind of guy. So, right? So it's, we're kind of different. But back to Matt. Matt reached out to me just before we started recording here, and he's put me on his daily gratitudes list because he knows how important that is to our show. It was maybe half an hour before we started recording. So I wrote a post, and I just want to share it real quick, if you don't mind, Don, if you because it's important to me, because it is. Daily gratitudes are so much. So he inspired me to do this. So I'm going to try and get through this one without cracking down a bit, because I'm probably going to, but here it is. So I often talk about the day Mom came and saved me from myself. After years of little to no contact by my choice, I had let the perceived lack of connection become the boot on my neck. I had messaged her. I was alone, cold, paralyzed by PTSD, and most of all, exhausted in a way that only people that have lived it can truly relate to, as I'm sure you can. A few hours later, Mom and 2 friends picked me up in Regina to take me back to Moose Jaw. It's about a 40-minute drive and marks the beginning of my recovery journey. I've been sober for a year, and that was closer to 2 years ago. To that, I will say recovery is rarely a linear path, and to follow the line from there to here would be like tracing a path of a moth, because it wasn't even two-dimensional, let alone linear, my path to recovery, right? So anyway, on the way out of the city, we stopped at a drive-thru at the Burger King for burgers, and at that moment in my life, it was the best and most appreciated burger I had ever had. So we're on the highway. I'm smashing the first real meal I've had in days, perhaps weeks. Mom and her friends are talking to me about recovery, an apartment they were setting me up with that very night, mere hours after I had messaged. And Mom starts talking about daily gratitudes. Keep in mind, all of this is almost overwhelming. I'm bursting with gratitude, but also fear of the unknown. I have PTSD, trying so hard to come to the surface. And the demons of addiction have just started to figure out what's happening and have already started with a nonsense that, albeit subdued, continues to this day. For whatever reason, amongst all of this in my mind, I zeroed in on Mom's talking about daily gratitudes. I vividly remember thinking, I'm so thankful in this moment, but would she just shut the fuck up so I can enjoy this burger? What I couldn't have known then is that gratitudes would eventually become entrenched in the very core of my being, and that the kindness showed to me at a time when I didn't feel deserving will ultimately lead me to rising from the ashes, embracing and being embraced by old and new friends alike, starting a podcast, and that those daily gratitudes will become a fundamental part of that podcast. We have no way of knowing the people's lives we touch with an episode, with the gratitudes, or any of the message. All of us at Ashes to Awesome team work on spreading, but I suspect it is more than one life. I expect it is more than the one life we would touch to make it all worth the trouble. Today, I have many things to be grateful for, and I really do, but I will focus on this one today. My mom not shutting the fuck up about the daily gratitudes while I enjoyed the shit out of a Whopper. Right? So, yeah, right. A lot of what you had just were talking about kind of spoke to what I'd written earlier, and I thought I got to share that, right?
It's,
God, it's not an episode if I don't cry a little bit.
It really is.
Right? Yeah. I don't, the F-bombs, Mom doesn't like when I put them in. She uses plenty when we talk. She just doesn't like to see me use them.
I used it once.
So I try not to.
There are podcasts where they use it all the time. But I try to be...
as long as it's in context.
I try to be mindful
right? Just no gratuitous way. Right. And here's the thing. Something I said to Matt that really got his attention, and I've noticed a bit of a shift, and I'm going to continue to see if it happens. We're talking about this very thing that you and I are talking about right now, Don. I said, here's the thing. If you're good with your words, there is nothing an F-bomb is going to add to your point. But by not putting it there, you could be adding to your point. So, and he's like, oh, you could just see it. Just hit him right in the face. He's like, I guess I'm kind of good with my words. So, yeah, I better, But it's true, right? It's true. You don't need
I
it
agree,
there.
because it can detract. Exactly. You can detract from what the message is.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about a message of gratitude,
yes.
That's one of the things that, for me, gratitude and gratitude in my heart for my recovery, for the people in my life, for the people I've gotten to know, for the opportunities that it brings every day, for just the ability to look outside here and see those trees, as I mentioned earlier. The gratitude fills my heart. And as Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, the co-founder of AA, once said, gratitude, when one's heart is filled with gratitude, then what can be expressed other than outgoing love? A grateful heart is a loving heart, and with gratitude comes love. And for me, I think the message of love is such an important part of recovery, because that's what we ultimately do. And this is, when you strip everything away, we're really loving each other back to health. We're loving each other back to reality. We're loving each other into recovery, because we connect, and we connect at a very, very deep level. And it's such a beautiful thing, and it's something that I'm eternally grateful for. And I can't stop being grateful. It's important that I have that front and center in my mind. So thanks for bringing that up, Chuck.
It is. Well, I'm going to get some daily gratitudes out of you in just a minute here. But before we do that, if you had a message to give to somebody who's in active addiction right now, what would you say to them, if you, in a sentence or two, or three or four?
There's always hope. The thing is that whatever it is that you're afraid of, whatever it is that is holding you back, whatever it is that is making you feel isolated and alone and afraid, it will be better. It will get better after you put down the substance, whatever that happens to be. And I know you're afraid to let go of it, but as soon as we let go, the freedom begins. As soon as we just open our hearts a little bit, the freedom begins.
Well said, man. Well said. One last question for you before we do gratitudes, Don. If you had to say something to the mother of somebody who's in active addiction, what would you say?
It's never in vain. Whenever we've lost someone, they're still with us. I believe that we're always connected. Anyone that we've loved, anyone that's loved us, we are still connected. And that it's important for us who are still here to take that love and pass it on to someone else. And that love and that experience and that pain that you've gone through, you can use to help someone else, whether it's another parent or another child, or just somebody who's hurting and just needs a little bit of your love.
I'm going to give that some space for a second, because that was beautiful. It really was. Brings us to my favorite part of any show, for obvious reasons, and that is the Daily Gratitudes. Today's Daily Gratitudes are brought to you by Revolution Recovery, helping men recover and become their best selves through support and treatment. They've been there, and they understand. So what you got for us today, Don?
Gratitudes, what I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
I'm always grateful, number one, for my recovery. I'm grateful for another sober day.
Right. Yeah.
I'm grateful for those in my life who love me, and for all those that I love. Because as my first sponsor said to me, and I still have the little saying on my bathroom mirror that I see every day for the last 40 years, is to love and be loved is the greatest joy on earth.
Like that. For me, it's going to be another fantastic guest. I hate to use the word better and better, but the guests seem to be getting, I don't know. It's great. It's great. The things that we're saying, the message, those things, because every single guest I've had has offered tremendous value. So, my mom, to every single donation that's come in and the ones yet to come in for Thailand, the opportunity to do it in the first place. And most of all, to every single person that is listening, watching, and supporting the show. If you take a minute to like or comment on any of the posts, on any of the socials, smash that subscribe button. These things really do help us continue to spread the message. And every time you do any one of these things, you're getting me a little bit closer to living my best life. My best life is to continue making a humble living, spreading the message. The message is this. If you are in active addiction right now, today could be the day. Today could be the day that you start a lifelong journey. Reach out to a friend, reach out to a family member, call into detox, go to a meeting. I don't care. Do whatever it is you got to do to get that journey started. It is so much better than the alternative. And if you are the loved one of somebody who's suffering an addiction right now, just taking the time to listen to our conversation, if you could just take one more minute out of your day and text that person, let them know they are loved. Use the words.
You are loved.
That little glimmer of hope just might be the thing that brings them back.
Body's getting cold, my life is running low. Feel me falling, my life is running out. I pray I make it now, but if I don't, it will be okay. I'll find you another day, and I'm not scared to go. It will be okay. I'll find you another way, and I'm not scared to go, because when I die, I'll be happier. Be a ladybug soaring through the sky. Please search for me. Please find me.